Hello, everybody. You're on the mic. And on today's episode, we're going to continue the series on classic American animation studios. Today, we're going to focus in on um, Walter Lantz Productions, the company, of course, that gave us such classic characters as Woody Woodpecker, Andy Panda, Chilly Willy, and Oswald the Lucky Rabbit. So, with no further ado, let's get going here. Okay, so Walter Lantz Productions was an American animation studio. It was in operation from 1929 to 1972 and was the principal supplier of animation for Universal Studios, now part of the media conglomerate NBC Universal, owned by Comcast. Nowadays, the company exists in name only as a subsidiary of Universal Animation Studios, handling the rights to the studio's characters in films. The studio was formed originally as Universal Studio Cartoons on the initiative of Universal movie mogul called I'm going to pronounce this as Lamley. I'm not sure if that it's Laemmle. So I'm just going to pronounce it as Lamley. Um, so who was tired of the continuous company politics he was dealing with concerning contracting cartoons to contracting cartoons to outside animation studios. Walter Lantz, who was Lamley's part-time chauffeur and a veteran of the John R. Bray Studios, with considerable experience in all elements of animation production, was selected to run the department. Um, in 1935, the studio was severed from Universal and became Walter Lantz Productions under Lantz's direct control. And in 1939, Lantz managed to gain the copyright for his characters. The cartoons continued to be distributed by Universal through 1947, changing to United Artists distribution from 1948 to 1950, and by Universal again from 1951 to 1972. The biggest characters for the studio were Woody Woodpecker, Andy Panda, Chilly Willy, and Oswald the Lucky Rabbit. The music-oriented Swing Symphony cartoons were another successful staple, but ended after swing music died out. Basically, they're talking about with swing big band, which was popular in like the 40s. So that led to the cancellation of their cartoon. And now let's look at the history here of Walter Lantz Studios. So from 1929 to 1935, the Universal Cartoon Studio. Lantz began his career at the art department of William Randolph Hearst's New York American during the 1910s, having his start in the cartoon industry at Hearst International Film Service, which in 1918 transferred its entire staff to Bray. As mentioned earlier, the John R. Bray Studio is what they're talking about there. By the mid 1920s, Lantz was directing and acting in the studio's top cartoon, Dinky Doodle, also becoming a producer as Bray attempted to compete with Hal Roach and Mack Sennett by making live action comedies. Bray Productions closed shop in 1927, and Lantz moved to Hollywood, trying to start his own studio while trying to make a living in a succession of odd jobs, including driving Universal owner Carl Laemmle's limousine. The chauffeur's job also landed Lantz at the Winkler Studio, which produced cartoons for Universal. So again, this is a period just prior to the Depression, obviously, um, in which he'd be doing little odd jobs here and there, and while he was trying to make his own studio. In early 1929, Universal was distributing the Oswald the Lucky Rabbit cartoons by Charles Mintz and George Winkler, created by Walt Disney. However, the popularity of the series was beginning to decline because of the lower quality of the output. Laemmle um, then fired Mintz and Winkler and was now looking for someone to head an in-house animation studio. So basically, rather than just contract out to other studios, he just wanted a in-house or a studio, basically an animation studio that was on site, basically, and then contracting out to others. Lantz won the studio in a poker bet with Laemmle. The first Lantz produced Oswald cartoon was Race Riot, released on September 1st, 1929. And contrary to what some out there may want to think, I don't believe this had anything to do with what we consider race riots today. Okay, I think it was something totally different. So, just keep that in mind. Remember, different time, a different time. So, the first animators for the studio included Winkler veterans Roland Hamilton, Tom Palmer, rubber hose pioneer Bill Nolan, Burt Fisk. Burt Fisk scored the first cartoons, having done this for a few Winkler Sound Oswalds. Just a quick little note there. What they're talking about when they say score, they're talking about like the person who usually would be in charge of doing the music for a production. That's usually what they mean. The music and sound of a production is what they mean by scoring it. Additions to the staff included Pinto Colvig and Fred Avery. Pinto Colvig, who of course famously was the first voice of like the first vocalizations and voice of Goofy and Pluto in Walt Disney Productions, and as well as Bluto. He would later become the voice of Bluto in the Fleischer Studios Popeye cartoons. He was also known for being in the role of Bozo the Clown as well. Fred Avery, many people know him better as Tex Avery. He would go on later to do work for MGM. I think he was responsible for creating Chilly Willy, in fact, for Walter Lantz Productions. So the earliest Lantz cartoons from 1929 were built around set plots and stories in the tradition of the earlier Disney and Winkler production shorts. The conversion of Oswald cartoons into musicals was a different matter. However, by mid-1930s, Lantz and his staff achieved this goal. Unfortunately, in the process, Oswald's personality became less consistent. It could and did change drastically to fit a particular gag. Yeah, that must have been interesting. Lantz's musical directors changed as well. To replace Dave Broekman, Lantz brought in James Dietrich, or David Brockman with James Dietrich, a member of the Paul Whiteman Orchestra, making the jazz era sound of the 1920s a quintessential element in the early Lantz cartoons. He remained as the permanent studio musical director until 1937. Lantz and Nolan worked in a character called Fanny the Mule for a 13 cartoon series announced by Lamley in early 1930. These cartoons, however, were never produced. Um, in 1931, Lantz faced economic difficulties and was forced to make cutbacks, shortening the lengths of the films and post synchronizing a handful of early Disney Oswalds. Another way out of the hole was to gain attention by creating a secondary series shorts featuring a new star, Pooch the Pup. Lantz and Nolan would now divide the studio into two separate units. Lantz would direct the Pooch cartoons, while Nolan would work on the Oswalds, with both series referencing the dire straits of the Depression. However, Pooch never became very popular, and the series was dropped in 1933. The following year, Nolan left the studio, and the cartoon, spelled Cartune as opposed to how we know it as Cartoon, classic series of Technicolor shorts began lasting for a year. Now, just so y'all kind of understand, back in what they call the golden age of Hollywood, golden age of animation, like this back in the 30s and 40s, cartoons were set up more as like what they call theatrical shorts. They would usually be, 5 minutes or so, give or take a minute. They would usually show up at the beginning. You know, this was at a time when going out to the movies every week was kind of a thing. It was kind of like one of the things to do at the time, right? So you'd go to the movie theater, you'd get there, and as kind of an icebreaker as you're settling in and getting yourself all settled in. That's they'd show these cartoon shorts to kind of just lighten the mood and relax everybody, before you got into the more serious topic of the movie. So that's how things were back then, you know. Okay, so we're gonna move ahead here to 1935. 1935, 1940, the decline of Oswald and new characters. So control of Universal by founder Carl Laemmle and his family was slipping away because of financial difficulties and came to an end in 1936. John Cheever Cowden became Universal's new president. With the change in management, Lantz seized the opportunity to ask Universal for permission to make his studio independent. Universal agreed, and on November 16, 1935, Lantz broke off and claimed the studio for his own, even though it remained on the Universal lot. Um, during during the mid to late 1930s, Oswald's popularity declined, and Lantz began to experiment with other characters to replace him. After a succession of failed attempts, the 1939 Life Begins for Andy Panda became an instant hit, and Andy Panda became a successful substitute for Oswald, who was retired in 1938. Lantz also switched to all-color production in 1939, shortly before Andy's debut. So basically, this goes to show you, you got an idea, keep at it. Eventually if you keep at it long enough, you might eventually grab something. You might eventually succeed. So, um, in 1940, Walter Lantz Studio was in trouble. Universal once again was facing severe financial difficulties and a possible bankruptcy, and decided to cut their weekly advance to the now independent Lantz Studio. Again, remembering the times, folks, this is around the time of the Great Depression. So, um, and we're going from the era of the Great Depression into World War II, basically, in its aftermath. So this left Lantz scrambling for alternative sources for funds, forcing him to shut down the studio for a while. Lantz was able to gain the rights to the characters of his films, including Oswald the Lucky Rabbit and the Andy Panda cartoon Crazy House was developed into Lantz's first fully independent film. Lantz used the film as a final appeal to the heads of Universal, and in the end was able to reach a satisfactory settlement with them. By autumn 1940, Lantz's studio was back in business again. 1940 also marked the debut of Lantz's biggest star, Woody Woodpecker, who debuted in the Andy Panda cartoon Knock Knock. That red-headed woodpecker that everybody probably remembers, right? Um, 1940 to 1946, Swingin' Symphonies and a Guess Who. Um, Woody quickly, Guess Who was one of Woody's um, catchphrases. Also, though, another little side note here on Woody Woodpecker. Woody's original voice was done by Walter Lantz's wife, Grace Stafford. Um, so just another little tidbit there. Grace Stafford did Woody's original voice, which just goes into the whole idea of women doing, like, usually cartoonish or prepubescent boy characters in cartoons. Woody quickly became extremely popular, being given his own series in early 1941, and became one of the most famous examples of the brash bird cartoon characters of the late 1930s, early 1940s, such as Daffy Duck. The success of Scrub Me Mama with a Boogie Beat and Boogie Woogie Bugle Boy, the former becoming a subject of controversy and even protest in later years over racial stereotypes. I think they're talking about the Scrub Me Mama with a Boogie Brush. Um, Also led to the introduction of the Swing Symphony series that fall, often featuring popular musicians of the time. The series ended in 1945 at the twilight of the big band era. Again, swing symphonies were basically cartoons with, you know, with that musical element in it, with in which they would feature big band artists of the time, which were very popular at that moment in time. The stuff that you would find on your hit parade for some of you from that generation. After the studio's 1930s cartoons were scored by a succession of composers, including James Dietrich, James Dietrich, Victor Records producer, Victor Records producer Nat Schickrett, and Harmon Icing veteran Frank Marsalis. Darrell Cocker took over in late 1940. Cocker's arrangements became noted for their distinctive swing flavor. After Disney's success with Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, the Lantz Studio planned to make its own feature, Aladdin and His Lamp, featuring the ascendant comedy duo of Abbott and Costello, but after Mr. Big Goes to Town failed at the box office, Aladdin never made it to actual production. Late in the decade, Lantz attempted to do a feature-length cartoon again, but it never came to fruition. Now we move ahead in time here to 1947 to 1949, United Artists and the first close down. In 1947, Lantz went to renegotiate his 7-year Universal contract with Matty Fox, the new vice president of Universal. But the deal was interrupted when new ownership transformed the company into Universal International and did away with most of Universal's company policies. The new management insisted on getting licensing and merchandising rights um, to Lance's characters. Lantz refused and withdrew from the parent company by the end of 1947, releasing 12 cartoons independently through United Artists during 1948, early 1949. The cartoons from this period stand out for its slicker animation compared to the previous Universal releases, mostly because of the influence of director and Disney veteran Dick Lundy, as well as the addition of Disney veterans such as Ed Love. This era also marked the end of the Andy Panda cartoons, whose popularity was waning. Under the deal with United Artists, Lantz was supposed to receive a percentage of box office seats to pay for the production cost of his cartoons. Unfortunately, UA attributed a very small portion of the dollar amounts to Lantz's shorts from the features. This was because UA was at the time a struggling studio attempting to reestablish the position in the industry it had in the 1920s. Again, we're in the midst, probably in the, well, actually just after the Depression, but um, the result was that Lantz exceeded his standing loan of $250,000 from Bank of America. He had left Irving Trust in 1942. So, at the recommendation of BAC President Joe Rosenberg, Lantz decided to shut down the studio temporarily at the end of 1948 until the loan was reduced. He asked Universal to reissue his older films during the hiatus, a request that was accepted by Universal President Nate Blumberg. So now he did apparently have some, after the little scuff up the year before, he did have some renewed new ties with them. So Lantz made a series of film ads for Coca-Cola in the interim and introduced the Woody Woodpecker song as a theme for the character. Guess who? Da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da, da-da-da. Right? I think we all might remember that one if we've ever seen a Woody Woodpecker cartoon. He also went to Europe in order to look for studios which could animate his films there, approaching government incentives not found stateside, as well as lower labor costs. However, the post-war economic situation of these countries, as well as the presence of stronger unions in Hollywood, led to them to back out and keep making films in America. So basically, things got a little too hot and heavy in Europe with the unions and all that. So I go back to America where he found it to be, a cheaper way to make cartoons. 1950 to 1966, revival and venture to television. In 1950, the Walter Lantz Studio opened its doors again. The first effort the studio produced was a brief sequence featuring Woody Woodpecker for the George Pal feature Destination Moon, released on June 27, 1950. Interesting thing about the Destination Moon movie was that both Fawcett Publications and DC Comics actually um, did a comic based on the movie. I believe, in fact, Destination Moon was part of the first issue of Strange Adventures in cover dated September of 1950. So, kind of an interesting little tidbit there. Um, Lantz then renegotiated with Universal for 7 cartoons to be released the following year, provided that they all feature Woody Woodpecker. Um, Lantz and his crew immediately set to work on the new batch of shorts. 2 of these new films, Puny Express and Sleep Happy, were previously storyboarded by Ben Hardaway and Heck Allen during the United Artists period. In 1951, the new cartoons were finally released, became instant hits with audiences. They were so successful, in fact, that Universal commissioned 6 more shorts for the following year. Overall, 1951 marked the beginning of a new era for the Walter Lantz Studio. During the mid-50s, the movie industry was suffering and losing money, meaning lower budgets for cartoons. By 1956, there were only 7 animation producers in the short subjects business, and by the end of the decade, the number would dwindle to 3. Walter Lantz, his distributor, Universal Pictures, knew that the only way to subsidize the rising cost of new shorts was to release their product for television. Yeah, as the dawn of television, with the dawn of television coming into being, you know, this would help a lot of the movie studios, with the idea of syndication, on particularly on independent networks, in particular later in the 80s, where you'd have like Walter Lantz Studios with the Woody Woodpecker showing, what they a lot of times what they would do, they'd package these shorts together in no particular order, and they would just put them on TV. Saw this with Warner Brothers and Looney Tunes. You saw this with Disney did a few packages like this. MGM did it with Tom and Jerry. So yeah. Norman Gluck from Universal Short Subjects Department made a deal with the Leo Burnett agency to release some older Lantz product on television. Burnett handled the Kellogg cereal account, and Lantz soon met with the Kellogg's people to sign the contract. Lantz was not very eager at first and admitted that he was only working in the medium because he was forced into TV, and cartoons for theaters would soon be extinct, which is kind of true. But that was kind of an evolution on the mediums as well, because it's like, with television becoming more and more popular, they were making almost a transition that cartoons are going from being theatrical to the small screen, basically. The Woody Woodpecker Show debuted on ABC on the afternoon of October 3rd, 1957, and would run, I guess, according to this, would supposedly run until December 1998. Off and on, though. I mean, it didn't continuously go through that. I don't know why they even put that last part in, but the series was seen once a week on Thursday afternoons, replacing the first half hour of the shortened Mickey Mouse Club. Lantz integrated his existing cartoons with a new live action footage, giving the show an updated look that satisfied both viewers and Lantz himself. The live action and animation segments created for the show, called A Moment with Walter Lantz, featured the informative look at how animation process for his cartoons, in parentheses spelled Cartunes, worked, as well as how the writers came up with the stories and characters. Live action segments were directed by Jack Hanna, who was fresh from the Disney studio, where he had done similar live action animation scenes for the Disney. So as part of watching the cartoon, you get a chance to see, you get a chance to talk to the creators of the cartoon and see how it all came about. So that's probably an interesting time to be watching then. Okay, so 1967 to 1972, the final years. By 1969, other movie studios had discontinued their animation departments, leaving Walter Lantz as one of only two producers still making cartoons for theaters. The other studio was the upstart DePatie Frayling Enterprises, working for Lantz's former contractor, United Artists. I did, of course, the other day I did a feature on DePatie Frayling. If you guys want to check that one out, DePatie Frayling, just to remind some of you, they, I guess their primary character was the Pink Panther. So, with that, so from 1967 to the studio's closure in 1972, Universal distributed the Lantz cartoon as packages, and theaters would play them in no particular order. So it started out in theaters, but it also graduated to syndicated television as well, doing that. Lantz finally closed up shop in 1972. By then, he later explained it was economically impossible to continue producing them and stay in business, as rising inflation had strained his profits. And Universal serviced the remaining demand with reissues of his older cartoons. Bye Bye Blackboard, a Woody Woodpecker cartoon, was part of the final slate of cartoons made at the Walter Lantz studio. 13 were completed for the 1972 season, one with Chilly Willy, 4 starring the Barry family, and the rest with Lantz star character Woody Woodpecker. Upon discovering that it would take a decade for his shorts to show a profit, Lantz himself decided to shut down company operations and threw a farewell luncheon with his staff at the announcement. So kind of an interesting end there, knowing that, you know, that things were in decline and, shifting of times and stuff, decided to shut down while you're still, moderately successful. So that was, so now let's look at the legacy part here. This is, so this is a legacy of Walter Lantz Productions here. Unlike other major animation studios in America, the Lantz Studio never continued full-time in existence during the classic period of American animation, closing down in 1948 and then reopening its doors 2 years later. It was finally shut down permanently in 1972 after the end of the golden age of animation. So I think what they were saying here is that um, it wasn't like a continual opening. They had a temporary closure and then a final closure 1972. I think that's what it came down to there. Since then, the characters of the studio have continued to be used in syndicated television series and in licensed merchandise. Lantz reissued 6 of the 1931-32 Disney Oswald cartoons, including Trolley Troubles, Great Guns, and The Ocean Hop. As I said, again, a lot of the theatrical shorts were converted into syndicated series. Universal did it with Walter Lantz. Warner Brothers did it with a lot of their Looney Tunes product. MGM did it with Tom and Jerry, Droopy, all those ones. So throughout the studio's history, it maintained a reputation as an animation house of medium quality. Lance's animated shorts, dubbed cartoons, Cartunes, as opposed to the more thought of Cartons, were considered superior to Terrytoons. I'll be doing Terrytoons tomorrow. Terrytoons, from what I understand, is the company that was responsible for like Mighty Mouse and Heckle and Jekyll. And on roughly the same artistic level as Famous Studios, another studio I'll do later, but they never gained the artistic acclaim of Disney, Warner Brothers, MGM, Fleischer, or UPA. UPA was responsible. United Productions of America. I think Mr. Magoo was probably one of their main characters that came out of that studio. However, the studio benefited from gaining talent from other studios who were tired of the management there and usually found the Lantz studio more enjoyable working environment. Tex Avery was just one of many talents Walter Lantz Productions benefited from on the rebound. I think the way they describe that, you can almost kind of look at Comicsgate in a way, kind of similar feel to it. So anyways, moving on here. In 1984, although Lantz sold everything outright to MCA Incorporated, he remained active in overseeing how Universal handled his characters for merchandise, TV, home video, theme parks, limited edition sales, etc., up until his death 10 years later in 1994. In February 2006, NBC Universal, who still owns the Lantz Library, sold the trademark rights to Oswald the Lucky Rabbit, along with the copyright to the original 26 cartoons produced by Walt Disney, to the Walt Disney Company. The sale was part of a deal that centered around both the rights to Oswald and NBC's acquisition of the rights to the NFL's weekly Sunday night game, in exchange for NBC Universal selling the rights to Oswald to Disney. Al Michaels was freed from his contractual obligations with ESPN, ABC, so he could join NBC and become Sunday Night Football play-by-play man. So basically what they're talking about here was, up until that point, ESPN, which by this point had become part of the Disney family of networks, ABC and all that, they had, of course, Sunday Night Football. And in negotiations with NBC, and to where NBC would gain the rights to air Sunday Night Football, they basically had to give up the Oswald the Lucky Rabbit properties from the Lantz Library. So that's what they were talking about there. In July of 2007, Universal Studios released the Woody Woodpecker and Friends Classic Cartoon Collection, a 3-disc DVD box compilation of Lantz cartoons. Again, I think Woody Woodpecker and Friends was basically the show title for the syndicated show. Second volume was released in April 2008, followed by a vanilla release in 2009, Woody Woodpecker Favorites, which contained no new to DVD material. Animation historian Jerry Beck, partly involved in the production of the DVD releases, has stated that plans for future volumes are currently on hold. In 2008, Illumination Entertainment, an animation production company founded by Chris Meledandri, made a deal with Universal Studios, which positioned Illumination as NBC Universal's family entertainment arm, that would produce 1 to 2 films a year starting in 2000. Like Walter Lantz Productions, Illumination retains creative control, and Universal exclusively distributes the film. So basically, Illumination in 2008, Illumination Entertainment basically took over the role that Walter Lantz Productions had back in the like 30s and 40s and back during its run. So that's pretty much it for that. Okay, so now with all that pretty much finished up, let's get to the next segment here, of course. This day in Nietzsche history. Let's look back on this day, today being May 21st, 2020. Let's look back on this date in Nietzsche history in the worlds of anime, comics, cartoons, manga, professional wrestling. So only a couple of things today because I figured I ended up realizing this video was going a little long. So on this date in 1995, from the Bayfront area or Bayfront Arena in St. Petersburg, Florida, WCW would host its Slamboree 1995 event. They'd had, at the time they had the pre-shows usually featuring their syndicated program main event, WCW main event, and on that program, the main event of the main event program was a quarterfinal for the at that time vacated WCW United States Heavyweight Championship, in which Meng beat Brian Pillman. On the main show, the main event for the main show included Hulk Hogan and Randy Savage beating Ric Flair and Vader in a tag match. Sting defeating Big Bubba Rogers in a lights out match. Um, let's see. You had Arn Anderson retaining the WCW World Television Championship in a match against Alex Wright. The Great Muta retaining the defending and retaining the IWGP World Heavyweight title against Paul Orndorff. The Nasty Boys beating Harlem Heat for the WCW World Tag Team Championship, and Meng kind of pulling two double duty in one night, beating battling Road Warrior Hawk to a double countout. And of course, Slamboree was their Hall of Fame event, and so for the 1995 Hall of Fame and WCW Hall of Fame inductees included Wahoo McDaniel, Angelo Poffo, the father, of course, of Randy Savage, Terry Funk, Antonio Inoki, Dusty Rhodes, Gordon Soley, and Big John Studd. So that happened in 1995, which is 25 years ago today, was WCW's Slamboree event. Then also on this date, 6 years ago in 2014, Archie Comics put out on the newsstands Archie's Funhouse Comics Digest issue number 5. Fifth issue of Archie's Funhouse Comics Digest was released on the newsstands on the state 6 years ago. And with that, if you guys like, if you guys want to check the links below, if you want to contact me directly, my Discord link is down there. You can direct message me there. You can check out the Discord and check out the Discord and check out the Discord and join if you'd like. I'm still promoting a bunch of different dub companies. Always remember, Funimation is not the only game in town. There's other dub companies to check out there. I'm still promoting, of course, Vic's GoFundMe, as well as Tug and Lug's latest comic venture on Indiegogo. Always, guys, never feel like you have to donate. If it's on your heart to do so and you have the means to, please consider donating. If you have already donated, please consider donating again. And if you cannot donate, you can still help out the cause by sharing the link. Sharing is caring. And you never know, maybe somebody in your circle of friends will want to help the cause. You never know. Also, if you like this content, please consider liking, commenting, sharing, and subscribing. Look forward to the conversation with you guys, long, civil, and respectful. And don't forget, tomorrow is the next premiere of Voices Big and Small, in which I'll be talking about, Calgary-based voice actor Lucas Gilbertson. So until then, guys, I'll see you guys tomorrow. Bye.